we're in kind of an anti-humanist age. I'm thinking, as we all are, a lot about AI, and the conversations we're not having, I think, enough, is how it's a denial of the human, and that it presupposes a structure of a culture that is about money production instead of human production. And so the studying of creative writing, first of all, I think makes students more AI proof because their bullshit detectors are strong, because they know how to read. And they also understand that uh, a large language model, that's the worst thing, is designed to be mediocre. It's designed to glom together all the other stuff and produce nothing fresh, just a remix of what's old. And so we're giving them skills using the human creativity, which is about juxtaposing things that don't seem to go together, and suddenly, through the alchemy of art, creating something new.
Welcome to Growing Inspiration, the podcast that celebrates beauty, wisdom, and creativity through the timeless traditions of the liberal arts. I'm your host, Shana McLean. Each episode features thought-provoking conversations with scholars, artists, and creative thinkers who help us explain our place in the world. Together we'll explore how the classical liberal arts, from literature, writing, and art, to history, philosophy, science, and music, continue to shape innovative thinking today and contribute to the richness of our lives. What is the value of creative writing in an increasingly AI-driven, economically focused world? In this conversation, I sit down with 4 accomplished writers and creative writing professors, Matt Ferrence, Marc Nieson, Phil Terman, and Tracey Lander-Garrett, to explore why literature and the humanities still matter. This conversation tackles some big questions: the challenges facing the creative writing classroom and higher education, how storytelling skills enhance every profession, practical strategies for maintaining a sustainable writing practice, and why human creativity remains irreplaceable. Whether you're a writer, educator, student, or simply someone who believes in the power of stories, this discussion offers both inspiration and practical wisdom for keeping the literary arts alive in challenging times. Hello, thank you for joining me today on the podcast. We have our first panel, and thankful to have these professors of creative writing and literature with me. I met them at the Bridge Lit Fest in Oil City, Pennsylvania, and wanted to kind of get some perspectives on creative writing in the college setting and master's programs, and why it's important and why this is something that you feel passionate about spending your life on. And so let's go around and just introduce yourselves and what you write. Who'd like to start? Give it to Matt.
Sure. Hi, my name's Matt Ferrence. I teach primarily creative nonfiction. I'm the backup fiction writer, and I teach environmental literature at Allegheny College. I write a lot about growing up in Pennsylvania, being an Appalachian who didn't know he was Appalachian. That was one of my books. The other one was about what happens when you run for political office and lose badly because you're not supposed to belong in the place where you've always lived. So I'm interested in the intersection of, I guess, regional life and politics and expression.
Marc?
Hey, I'm Marc Nieson. I teach at Chatham University, where I teach a swath of classes. I teach fiction, nonfiction, memoir, screenwriting, travel writing, a number of different things there. And I write in all of those genres, if you will. And currently I'm working on a novel called Houdini's Heirs.
Great. Phil?
I'm primarily a poet, almost exclusively, but not totally. I'm actually trying to work on a memoir as well. So I retired from Clarion University, amazingly enough, 4 years ago. In January, it'll be 4 years, which is kind of incredible. As you know, I do the Bridge Literary Arts Center. It's been a big thing for me in terms of trying to just sort of enhance and work with the area community to develop a writers group and organization that would make writers feel comfortable and give them a place to share their work.
Tracey?
Hi, I'm Tracey Lander-Garrett. I am the editor of the Bridge Lit Mag, working with Phil and a number of other folks in the area. I am a writer of poetry, creative nonfiction, and fiction, kind of all over the place with that. I was a adjunct professor as well as a part-time professor at a number of schools in the greater New York City area, including Brooklyn College and Borough of Manhattan Community College. And I did that for 13 years. And I also worked with the Austin Public Library down in Texas in their Badger Dog creative writing program for a few years. And now I'm up here in Oil City.
So one of the things that I've kind of been thinking about lately is, why do we still in today's age love, or at least those of us on this call, love writing and love the humanities and literature? And what is the purpose still in having that as an educational endeavor? And why is it important to our culture? And why? And I believe deeply that it is, but can we articulate what it is about the craft and the outcome of that is important to culture and society? Who would like to jump on that one first?
I saw Phil's mouth move, so Phil was volunteering.
Okay, thanks, Matt. Well, we share a passion for that, but also articulating our culture in a way, and chronicling our culture in a creative. It's different from historical writing, partly historical, but it's also sort of a sense of connecting with. In a broad sense, connecting with human beings, with history, with the future, and in a sense of the create. When I think of creative, I think of something beautiful as well. It's an art like other arts, and so we have a natural human DNA desire, something for beauty and for language, and we're the one animal that does have, as far as I know, maybe not, playing sort of a well sophisticated language that we want to develop, explore, create, and connect with other humans, past, present, and future, in a way that reminds us that we're all part of the human family. And so I think stories, stories is at the fundamental root of our being, as well as the beauty of language. So between story and language and beauty, it's another form of articulating that we're human and that we share that common connection.
Well, I think maybe I'll add to that. I think we're living in some times right now where it feels like the arts and the humanities are beleaguered. Let's say this particular country has never really supported artists in any major fashion, but certainly not through the government. I mean, there are some grants and whatnot, but overall, I don't get a sense that what our intentions are necessarily valued. I think why is it important to keep I mean, it's always going to be important to teach. And at its root, this is folks have a need to express, have a need to ask questions or try to come up with answers as to who we are, why we are. And I think those are areas that the arts are where you can do that. I mean, the other, I mean, we can talk about whether it's functional or not in society. I think absolutely. I mean, it doesn't have something that you can quantitatively measure, but in terms of any kind of quality to life, I think my wife years ago, there was a time when I was going, oh, I should apply for grants. And in the state of Pennsylvania, where we are here, there aren't a lot of grants for individual artists. At that time, I was living in Minnesota, and I was thinking, well, why would anybody give me any money to do my little belly button lint, explorations? And she is a choreographer and a dancer, and she has more or less survived on grants and for the last 40, 50 years. And she said, well, just imagine waking up in a world tomorrow where there are, no books, no theater, no museums, no music, none of that. She said, just imagine waking up in a world like that. It would be far more bereft. And she said, basically, some of these grants are out there for you, so why not you if the work is worthy? So I think it's mostly about thinking about not just why is it important, but why is it important thinking about what if it wasn't there? That's, I think, the way to look at it. We don't notice anything until it's gone often.
Right.
I'll throw in, I like citing a line from the poet Richard Hugo in his book Triggering Town. and I'm paraphrasing a little bit. He says something like the creative writing classroom is the last place in the university where your life still matters. And the idea that the creative writing classroom is one of the places, and I would expand that out to all the arts, where you're actually bringing your human experience into play as the material of production. Right now, it feels, and I don't know, it seems verifiable that we're in kind of an anti-humanist age. I'm thinking, as we all are, a lot about AI, and the conversations we're not having, I think, enough, is how it's a denial of the human, and that it presupposes a structure of a culture that is about money production instead of human production. And so the studying of creative writing, first of all, I think makes students, why we need to teach it, it makes them more AI proof because their bullshit detectors are strong because they know how to read. And they also understand that uh, a large language model, like in our world, that's the worst thing, is designed to be mediocre. It's designed to like glom together all the other stuff and produce nothing fresh, just a remix of what's old. And so we're giving them skills, and we've devoted our lives to skills that are about finding the novel, using the human creativity, which is about juxtaposing things that don't seem to go together, and suddenly, through the alchemy of art, creating something new. So I'm not bullish on the future. I'm kind of mopey, but I believe very much that the work that we're doing has tremendous civilization value.
Civilization value. That's a great phrase.
I just came up with it. I should be a poet.
You are, Matt.
I guess I would say that the value of I'll make it personal. Like the creative writing has had value to me in terms of an inward journey and better understanding myself, understanding my past, questions I had about um my parents were very challenged. My dad was an alcoholic. My mom had bipolar disorder. There were a lot of suicide attempts. And then they split up, and there was just a lot that I held in. There wasn't a lot of room in my childhood for the sharing of any kind of trouble that I was having because my parents had their own troubles. So writing kind of for me emerged out of a need to share, a need to vent, and a need to, again, just to understand. And I think that humanness is something that a lot of pieces of writing touch on, whether it's fiction or creative nonfiction or poems or whatever, that there's something in the human experience that can't just be captured by machinery in a plain gray world where there is no art and there are no rainbows, you know? And I really enjoyed trying to make literature accessible to students, especially students who are saying, well, I'm an accounting major, or well, I'm planning to go to med school, and trying to find some way to reach them or to incorporate a reading. God, what's it called? The Death of Ivan Ilyich. Does anybody know that one? It goes through this man's life, but it also kind of touches on the experience of being ill and not knowing how to make that illness better, and the reactions of society around the person. And it really just, if you've never been a patient, you know, it might be an instructive piece of writing for medical personnel to kind of get that sense of one person's experience of the medical institution as it was in the 19th century.
Right. If I could pull that thread a little bit, you know, I think we all can agree that those of us who are into literature or writing, you don't have to convince those people to take the classes or to be interested in it. But for those who are, you know, just maybe taking a class as a gen ed that they have to get through, like, do you have other tips? Like, you know, Tracey mentioned some of the trying to find readings that might appeal to what it is that they intend to go on and do in their career. But what are some other ways that you feel you can reach out to people who might just be like, I'm just going to be a nurse and I don't need this and this is wasting my time, but they need to be exposed to this kind of thought just to be a decent human being. How can you reach out to that kind of person?
I thought a lot about this. I was the chair of our department for a while, and I can't say that we've been wholly successful because there's a narrative, a national narrative that denies everything we claim. Um, Part of it is utility in a way I think we rarely talk about utility, and it's the utility of storytelling in that if you're a nurse, if you're an accountant, if you're a physician, you think back, everything you learn how to do is actually built on a story, not actually on the raw facts. And you're never going to be a bad employee if you're better at telling stories and if you're better at communicating to an audience that isn't a specialist. And so that's part of that utility pitch, is that you can use the tools of storytelling and language to be better at the thing you're doing. And it's practical. You'll be better at your job, but it also, I think, students can then help see it changes their relationship to the profession they choose, which that's hard to pitch and draw in, but I think that can create a culture of recognizing that you aren't just a cog in a wheel. Then whatever your profession, you're thinking about the stories that have made that profession do the things it does.
Then it sort of leads me to think about, pitching the course titles from the word writing to the word story.
Mm.
One of the things I've done is do talk. I call it talk poetry, connected to documentary poetry, and this obviously is true for any genre, not just poetry. Where I worked with, I happened to be my sister-in-law and some members of my Jewish congregation, recording them just telling stories about whatever issues they want to talk about. And everybody loves stories. We love stories when we're children. Everybody loves stories when they're children. Every child does. And somehow through the educational process and system, they get scared. Many get scared off. And maybe the word writing in a way, not that people shouldn't write and we shouldn't lead that into writing, but maybe it's the window through which we approach it. And I like what you said there, Matt, about there's stories in every kind of, even in most. Some of my best writing students have been at pre-med or science med, because they could tell the story. So I'm going to amen.
Well, there's a ton of data in medicine relative to the healing powers of telling stories and processing that. There's no question about that. It's funny, I rarely ever think about pitching or utility. I just teach the class and I try and put things in front of people. And it's not so much, the writing seems to be a icing on it. To me, it's how do I have them start looking at other things that other people have written. And then within that, how do they find ways to connect with it? How do they find ways to think about that? And most importantly, I think this at its most basic level, I think it's about teaching people about empathy, teaching people how to see something through someone else's perspective. And I think that comes from the writing side as well as the reading side. You write and, am I alone with this? Is somebody out there? Do you have this also? Am I crazy? I think those are that's the basic kind of, it's a dialogue, and the weirdest thing is that you sit at home in a room all alone making it, and somebody sits in another room in their bed at night reading it, and you're actually extremely isolated. And yet what's happening in between you, because of that story or because of that words or because of the art or the beauty, is there's a connection going on there. And this goes back to what Matt was saying about, are we losing the humanity component? I don't think the arts are going to die. They will always find ever since we started scratching on cave walls with pictures that was about trying to tell a story about the hunt. It's going to be there. The need to tell that, the need to process, the need to communicate, that'll always be there. It'll always find it. It's just a question of whether or not, how can you do it? How do you find a way to do it? That shifts in
If I could just,
time to time.
the arts may not die, but people may die in wanting to do the arts. We think about Russia with Stalin. We think about,
Sure.
and I think that's what's happening today. Because the question is, I think you're right, Mark, about when students are already in the classroom, but how do you get them in the classroom? And I think it has to do with it takes a village. It takes the university. It takes a whole social compact to start that at a young age, and create the atmosphere and it's the politics and the economics that are saying, no, you can't take these courses because they're not related. They're not practical. So how do we get the universities themselves, which is related to the cultural economical system of saying this is an important thing, and we want everybody to work with this. It has to be a whole cultural thing to get them to be in those, right, as part of a communal thing.
And with some of the recent kind of removals or defunding of certain humanities programs, down in Texas, Chicago, that sort of thing,
Or
you know, what can we do collectively? Is it just a matter of continuing to put pressure on the boards and, from a community, or is there something? Are there smaller schools that will pop up to fill that void? What do you think the future is, if this continues to happen where the economics just say, "Oh, well, it's not worth it to have this program."
That's such an easy question.
Well, a good example is the Florida in Sarasota, the new school was called, and
Yeah.
the governor completely turned it. The new school was the kind of school we're talking about we should have more of because it worked as a community. And the governor completely flipped it to no, it has to be, mandated that they don't do this and they do that. So it takes a cultural shift, an ocean shift of, advocating, voting for the people that will advocate for that. Takes a revolution, I think.
Yeah, and I think those of us who are in positions within academies have to learn to speak the language of the structures, because when you start looking at like ROI, humanities departments are cheap. They actually tend to generate more revenue than they take to run, right? So they're actually profit positive, even though the narrative is that they're loss leaders. And so we have to cultivate our ability to, and we hate doing it because it hurts, right? Because we have to pretend that the value of what we do is economic. And I think we're all agreeing here that's not the value we're really seeing of it, but that there is an economic reality that speaks back against the value. Like what Phil's talking about with New School, the reason they do things like that is because artists are super dangerous, right? And we can see this throughout time. Artists are put in prison, artists are killed because they're speaking back to the way things are, to imagine the way things could be. So we have to be able to play in those trenches and explain, no, you say we're expensive, but we actually aren't expensive. You say the wages of English majors are low. They actually aren't when you actually start looking at the money. You say there's no economic benefit to the arts. The arts economy, I used to know this figure off the top of my head, but it's massive in every state. Like the state of Pennsylvania, the arts economy is similar in scope to the transportation economy, right? No one talks about it like that. And that makes it easy to pick us off. So we have to find some people who are willing to be those kind of wonks and make the argument.
Yeah, I just heard recently that Ireland is considering, you've heard about this too, Matt, of creating a living wage for artists because they did the numbers and they found out that what art was generating was a huge amount of money, even in terms of like, okay, so someone goes to theater, they have to go to have dinner before they go to theater. So that's a way in which it is generating income and jobs and all kinds of things that surround the actual art making itself. And so there's literally this, Ireland is saying, oh, this is valuable. Maybe we should create a living wage for all these people because they're actually making money for us, on some level. I mean, it's pitiful that it's come to that, but I think it's exactly what Matt is saying here. It's like, it's another language that you just have to learn how to speak them. And I don't think most people making art, unless they're doing performative art, they're mostly solitary people. They don't sort of engage. So yeah, I think it behooves a lot of people to start to figure out how to be equally as smart and almost also equally creative. I mean, you're already a creative thinker. How do you be creative thinker within this range of how to make a balance sheet? It's not rocket science, quite
I find myself wanting to hand that portion of things over to AI.
frankly.
Right. But then it's that question of, people feel that they don't have a strength in something. And so they are reaching out to AI for that support. Interestingly, and I don't want to take this too far afield, but I have a friend who has used AI to create a virtual family for herself, a group of individuals who support her and, all the love and everything else. And this was recently, and I mean, just within this past week, featured in the Boston Globe, an article about her and this family that she's created, and how it has led to successes for her in many ways. As much as, like, we say, well, we don't want our students plagiarizing, we don't want them, using AI to write their papers. Well, no, but at what point, do we allow the technology to help us with our weaknesses while not just completely giving into them, like, I don't know, like there are overlords or something. Obviously, we don't want the whole time travel paradox. We don't want any of that to happen. So
That's a perfect segue yet again, Tracy, into my next question was about AI. What are you guys seeing in your classrooms, and how are you, I guess, either using it or combating it to help students to still have critical thinking skills and still be imaginative and not reliant on the tool?
Thankfully, I'm not teaching anymore, so in the classroom and in that situation. So I'll leave it to those who are.
Well, in most of my classes, I had an AI issue in one class. It was a general lit class. And it has to do with fear, right? The students were uncomfortable doing what I was asking them to do, which was to be expressive. And I caught them, of course, and I had them redo it. And I'm thinking of one in particular. I won't give too many details, but the paper that was turned in was soulless and bland. But the student was afraid of their language skills, which weren't very well developed. And they rewrote it, and the language skills were objectively poor, but the essay was amazing. And I think that helps. That's one of the stories we can tell about. That's actually the point. It's not about the correctness of the prose. It's about your human connection to things. So the vast majority of my classes, my students, I'm lucky, we're writing about ourselves, and to offload that writing to something that's not us doesn't actually make much sense. But that's, I think, how we have to combat it. Again, with story, I guess that's my theme today, is to talk about what we're giving away when we're not doing the hard work. There was, I think it was in New York, well, it was an Atlantic article a week or two ago about this, is that the struggle of art creation is actually the point of art creation. The object you make is a lot less relevant than all the things you had to do to get to it. That's how we have to, and that actually is directly contrary to all the narratives of economy, because product is what we want. And so we have to emphasize, no, process is what we want. You can produce garbage on the other end, but how you got there is going to help you be a better person.
It's the experience of doing it.
Yeah. Yeah.
In the end, people say, well, why should we write? What is it about writing that you love? It's the act of writing.
Yeah.
And that gets
Yeah.
away from the whole thought process of, as you're saying, Matt, the reward. What's the reward? It's like when people say, well, I haven't published. And it's hard to, everybody has that feeling. In their lives and as a writer, and people get really frustrated if they don't get, as many acceptances as they want and they feel they should. And sure, it's frustrating, but if that's the goal, try to get a sense, even for my own self, that's not the goal. That's outside myself. Somebody else is making that decision, and that reward at the end, that carrot at the end. I've had friends who've quit writing because of they didn't get their stuff published. And they were only in their 20s. Oh, I'm not going to write anymore. I'm not like Bernard Shaw or Shakespeare. I'm never going to get what? So it's a whole mentality change for the individual writer is always struggling with that.
I definitely struggle with that mentality change. Um, I had a cousin who sat down and coached me through just saying I'm a writer because, I couldn't own that. I'm a writer?
Yeah, that's a
No, I'm a writer. Well, but am I a writer? Yes, you're a writer. So it's funny. And there I was, I've been publishing poetry. I'd been through a master's program and I had a bachelor's degree in creative writing from a school that didn't even have a creative writing major, but I made my own. So yes, I'm a writer, but owning that was difficult.
Well, that's all. I mean, that's also a cultural situation that one has to identify themselves by what they do, or they have to make it
that's
a
right.
noun as opposed to I write.
Right.
I write. I garden. Am I a
Well,
gardener? I don't know if I'm a gardener. I garden. These are things that we do.
yeah, yeah. We have to define ourselves.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
love that.
but that's all. I mean, that is coming out of that's coming out of the culture that we have. I mean, we have this Protestant work ethic in this country that goes way, way back, and that's a great deal about how things are going. And I lived in Italy for a while. When you meet someone for the first time, here you would say, "So what do you do? What's your job?" And there, when you meet someone, there's your phrase you say "Cosa fai di bella," and it's like, "What do you do that's beautiful?" That's how you introduce one another to oneself, and so that's a cultural difference.
It is.
Well, that's really cool.
Right. Yeah, I love that about it being more of a struggle or even a practice that you're doing. And if we kind of turned from the classroom to your personal writing, like how do you keep moving forward with your projects? And what advice would you have for those who are out there going, oh, I'm not a writer and my writing's not good. I can't put the words together. How do you keep moving and how do you find that beautiful experience in the process?
I mean, it does have to be a process, right? You can't edit nothing. I use a lot of these things. Anne Lamott, Shitty First Drafts, in her excellent book on instructions on writing in life, Bird by Bird. That shitty first draft is everything because you can change some of those words. You can edit it. You can play with it. You can shift your tone. You can make it happen on a sunny day. You can make it happen on a cloudy day. Just finding your way into the story and the personal relation of, I don't know, important snippets and moments and what is beautiful.
That's absolutely right, and That's the practitioner you're talking about. That's the discipline. That's the work. Like anything else, you have to work at it. How does one get there? I think that could happen with, especially if you're just starting. Having a good teacher, I think is good, or having a good community is good. Working with other writers, and sharing things. Some people say, well, when I retire, I'm going to write my novel, as if it's just happens, and that mentality, I think, has to shift, that writing is as much work as, carpentry, building houses. You work on it every day. You get the nails, you know how to hammer them in straight, you know, uh, and so there are skills involved. So classes are important in one form or another, and learning or reading about it and practicing it and all that kind of stuff. Just like practicing the violin and learning how to play an instrument. It's an instrument. And so getting that, and I think you're absolutely right about the shitty first draft and second and maybe even third and fourth.
16th. And I mean, I think it's also needing to put within the teaching the understanding that this is the landscape. The landscape is difficulty. The landscape is how do you do a practice. And I mean, I know something I've always ended up teaching because there's so much, again, this is sort of product related. So much of the emphasis in coursework is on what you write. And it's like, we're going to do the workshop and we're going to polish this thing. right? And that's certainly important, but what's almost more important in terms of people's progress as a writer, or let's say sustainability as a writer, you have to talk about how do you write, not what you write, but how, and when do you write, starting to look at your practice and starting to understand when are you writing well and when are you not writing well. What are the hindrances and what are the things that help what you're doing. And I think, and recognizing that that's something that's going to shift over time as well. I mean, when I was young, I used to write during the night. I can't freaking do that anymore. So, it's also just staying on, looking at what you're doing. You have that good writing session, which you think comes out of nowhere, and it doesn't come out of nowhere. There were all kinds of circumstances that enabled you to focus. And that's the term I use more than discipline. I don't like that term. That's like an army term to me. Focus is, how do you create a space where you can focus? And the factors are many, and they could have to do with what you slept, what you ate. Is it caffeine that you had prior? Is it what kind of pencil are you using? I mean, all those kinds of things to look down at it. What did you eat before? I mean, it sounds ridiculous, but an athlete wouldn't overlook things like that. And what you are talking about here is a kind of building an efficiency, or building a flexibility with how you work. So I think that's one of the things that's real important. And then you also are not, then the focus isn't on the product. The focus is on what you're doing. And then you recognize that just the doing ends up being what's ultimately the reward. Is like, how do I make this sentence work? You know, how does this verse just ain't there yet? How do I make that? That's what the involvement is. It's not, once, I don't know about you guys, but I've never been interested in publishing a great deal. And when I do, it's sort of, okay, done. Who cares? It's next. It's what's next is what's intriguing. That's where the energy is. And then you create new challenges, so you're not doing what you just did before. So it's always opening, and it's always difficult. If it's not, then it's boring.
I have a really unsexy answer to the question of motivation. And I want to say it was Dorothy Parker who said this, but I may be misattributing it, but she deserves it anyway. And it was basically, I don't know when inspiration's going to strike, but I'll be sure that I'm sitting at my typewriter when it does. And we have to demystify, I'll just say, I have to demystify the process for myself. The other person I think about is Bill Rohrbach, who as a professor found he was spending more time at meetings and prepping for class, and he wasn't writing. So he had to recalibrate that writing is my job. So he scheduled it in the same way, because you wouldn't not show up for a mandatory meeting. You wouldn't not show up for class. So when I'm productive, which isn't all the time, to be clear, but when I'm productive, for me, it's been helpful to have a schedule, and that and this is what I tell my students too, when they have big projects, these 2 hours are absolutely for this job. I'm also a musician, and I know how that works is I'm going to practice every day, because if I don't, I'm going to get worse. And so for a writer, it's part of that. Is I like what Mark's saying is not a discipline. I like the idea of practice, but it becomes an embedded, non-negotiable time on the calendar that I'm going to do it. And then lo and behold, you produce so many bad drafts that suddenly you see a sentence that works, and that helps you get there the next day.
I also think we're talking about the term bad drafts and shitty drafts. We also have to develop a critical consciousness, and that's where I think workshops help. I teach now in a wonderful program called Lit Cleveland, that has incredibly amount of classes, and I teach poetry workshops. It's only 2 hours a week, and most people are they want to just do a group hug. This is great, and I try to get them to say, well, okay, let's do some workshopping here. Let's get down to it's very easy to say, I love this poem, or, and that kind of thing. But people want to hear it. They want to say it. They want to connect with the poem. But you want to, or the story, but you want to develop that critical, and that happens, I think, you have the reading we do. I mean, it's like, I taught a class when I was at Clarion, a creative writing class, a workshop poetry, and it was signed up by many people. And then a class, 20th century poetry, reading poems, not writing, reading poems. It got canceled. Only 2 people signed up for it. They would rather write their poems than read, you know? And then I would say, well, what poets do you read? They don't read very many poets. I say, well, okay, anybody a musician? I said, yeah, okay, well, plays guitar. Okay, do you have any favorite guitar players? Oh, yeah, Jimi Hendrix, Eric Clapton, Segovia. They listen to music. Musicians listen to music. Painters who are studying art, you look at history of painting. Writers sometimes are concerned with their own stuff, and I think it's important to really educate oneself on the history and of the art you want to practice. By the way, I like the term discipline, but it's not a big deal.
That's great. And I've recently been in part of a writing group, and I think that's something that people kind of have to get used to. Like you almost have to tell them, okay, you can say one nice thing, but then you have to find something that you can say that people have to work on.
That's great.
And because everybody just wants to be nice and not hurt anybody's
Group
feelings. Right. But I find that is incredibly important for accountability. That if I know I have to show up with pages to read, I'm going to get my butt in the seat and do the writing.
Do you look at other poets or writers, established writers as examples? I think Marc was talking about that, as a group, not just your own writing, but also examples of what you consider, what you're reading and why that inspires you to and triggers writing for you, that kind of thing.
Right.
I couldn't write without that component, If I'm sitting down to write, in my writing my notebook and practicing, I've got Rilke there, or I've got some writers that I love that I'm reading at the same time, and actually writing quotes down from those writers, and getting a feel for what they're writing, and that kind of thing, and just bringing all those books in there, all those great writers of the past are my muses and teachers.
Let's think about that. What are your favorite writers or favorite books that are good examples of the craft, that are the inspiration that we can take away? You mentioned Rilke.
I'll limit myself to one. I mean, there's so many, but for me, Annie Dillard, Pilgrim at Tinker Creek, got me into writing, and I come back to it to be blown away and disappointed in myself as a writer all the time. So it's a great template for my writing life.
Great writer.
I'm a big fan of Richard Adams because as a fiction writer, he takes on just these massive epics that are, just one novel, but stacked this big and just really fascinating, from taking on the persona of Traveler, the Civil War horse of General, I forget his name, and versus, dogs or a young woman. I love Richard Adams.
But that's hard. I mean, they're all in there. They're all on the shelves. I'll just say lately I'm reading a lot of Teju Ko's work, who works in fiction, nonfiction, art criticism. He's a photographer, you name it. So it just depends upon, often it's what I'm working on, which will lead me to new work. And often it's just stumbling on, it's going out in town and seeing who comes around into town to read and learning new things like that. Yeah, we all have our touchstones that we go to. I would say advising other people is just get into a friggin' library or a bookstore and wander a stack and just pull one out and crack it open to a page. And does it speak to you? Yes. Take it. Doesn't speak to you? Put it back. Everybody has to find their own, really.
Often it's in a classroom type situation, though. But yes, that's the key. That's the key to the to the kingdom.
But I mean, everybody doesn't have the opportunity to be in classes necessarily. And
Right.
so,
Yeah.
I mean, what we still have, although funding for that is, of course, been compromised, there are still public libraries.
Absolutely.
Oh, you know what? In Venango County, the library tax was defeated on November 4th, and we're very sad, very sad, very sad. 70% voted against raising the tax just a little bit to preserve our library. We have libraries, but we're losing that as well. We're losing our culture. We're in an era of losing our cultural dimension.
To the dark ages.
But then we have shitty things to write about.
Yeah, sir. You got to suffer to sing the blues.
It'll flow, Matt said mopey. I don't even know if I'm mopey. But I do have this sensation that something else will evolve even within this AI kind of thing, which I have been paying no attention to whatsoever. Something will evolve out of that. That will involve expression. That will involve making something.
I think that evolving we have to sort of work at it to try to get it to evolve. We have to,
Of course.
work
Well,
small
thank
steps.
you all so much for joining me and for this great discussion. It's prompted a lot of thoughts for me, and I'm sure for our listeners. And I will look forward to hearing and seeing more from you all in your writing and Lit Fest for next year.
Yes, that's all. Meet again at the Lit Fest. Hey, it's so great that you're doing this podcast. Thank you.
Truly.
Well, thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
Thank you,
Really
Thanks
Seth.
so
appreciate
much
it.
for having us.
Advocating
thank
for
you.
writing and for the arts and for reading. We really appreciate that. I know I do. I know we all do.
Thank you for joining me on this episode of Growing Inspiration. Please take a moment to subscribe and share with someone who needs to hear this today. To learn more, subscribe to my newsletter at my website, gardenofmydelights.com. I'd love to continue the conversation and hear what you would like to explore next. Find me on Instagram, Facebook, Substack, and YouTube at Garden of My Delights. Until next time, keep nurturing your creativity and looking for beauty and wisdom all around you.